All right, so welcome to episode number 5 of COVID Talk. This is a really special one for me. I mean, I was sitting there thinking, what is it that people haven't heard enough about recently? And that's definitely going to be coronavirus. And obviously, we can't really escape it, and I'll explain why. But today it's an honour. This is a strange one, isn't it? But I'm going to welcome my partner in crime, Dr. Karine Johannessen. How are you doing?
I'm good.
You ready for this?
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
Yeah? Nervous?
A little bit, yeah.
Right.
It's so strange to be in a camera position.
Is this the first time you've done anything like this? I mean, I asked that as if I
Yeah.
don't know, but of course it is, isn't
Of
it?
course I've...
You know, obviously, for people who don't know, you've recently become a doctor, and your journey as a junior doctor just happens to coincide with the start of the world's biggest global pandemic, and it's kind of a good time, really, I think, to sit down and talk about it. And for those people who are out there feeling confused, not really understanding what's going on, I think it's a good thing to maybe like share your story a little bit about what the hell that was like.
Yeah, it was really not what I expected it to be. Obviously, the changeover when you become a junior doctor is in August. So I had a good of 6-7 months before the pandemic, and I'm really happy I had that, because I think it would be a different ball game if actually coronavirus happened during changeover.
Yeah.
Being a junior doctor is hard. It's hard enough already, because you're constantly on the wards, you are standing up, you solving puzzles, keeps being interrupted by things that goes wrong, because that's the hospital life. And you pulled one way and the other. So having a pandemic as well was tough.
What do you think your earliest thoughts were when it came to the news breaking? We were actually away at the time, weren't we?
Yeah.
So we were living it up in Bali. Life was good.
It was amazing.
And then the news started to heat up, and you were in this really strange position because you knew you were going back into your sort of training, and you knew that life was going to be very different when you went back in.
So it was strange, because we were talking about this, and we were also thinking of cancelling our holiday in Bali, which I'm really happy that we didn't, because I really needed that. But when we were in Bali, I didn't think that much about it, because I had no idea what would happen when we got back. When we left for Bali, there was hardly any cases in UK. We had toilet paper, we had everything. The hospital life was completely normal. And when we got back, I got an email saying that a normal changeover would not happen.
And when you say changeover, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so doctors in training, we change every 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent 4 months in a specialty, and then we change to a completely different one. It could be surgical, it could be the community, or it could be a different medical specialty. So for me, I was supposed to go into surgery, and I was quite excited about it, because I spent 8 months in medicine, which had been really challenging, but also really good as well. And it was kind of good to experience something new. But the week before the changeover, we got an email saying there are many more corona cases in the country. We're going into a lockdown, basically. Boris Johnson announced his message, and we got an email saying that our rotation were cancelled. We're going to have a new rota, which is the corona rota. And no one knew anything about it. And I don't think the hospital policymakers knew anything about it either. They just tried to gather as many doctors they could to have on the shifts to help out. So I went from having a pretty routine mixed with some night shifts and on-calls, obviously, to suddenly being 6 days in a row in a completely different specialty than I normally did. And we were constantly rotating. So we did 6 days in a row, about, I think it was 10-hour shifts. Then you had 2 days off, and then you were on nights for 6 nights, which is more than I've ever done. And then we had technically 1.5 day off, and then back to days again.
I think from a personal standpoint, that's when I realised just like what you were made of. And this goes out to all doctors and all care workers, because it's like, I mean, to me, you're nothing short of a hero, and I don't mean to, and I mean that because when I was watching that moment happen, And we can share with people watching. It's like we ended up in that weird dichotomy where we were like, well, what do we do? We're facing something where at the time it's one thing talking about it now, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if we rewind the clock, at the time, all I cared about was your safety. And you remember, and it was just like, well, look, you've got to really rethink this. Are you just going to go and jump in the fire here, not knowing what this virus is doing, not understanding anything about it? And I remember you just turning around going, I've just got to go in. I've got to do it. And it wasn't ever a thought for you to not...
No, I think it was tough. Like, it definitely hit my mind. Like, I was thinking, am I going to get unwell? Are you going to get unwell? Are we going to... Is this so bad, like Ebola or SARS and MERS, and where doctors were dying and healthcare professionals were dying, nurses were dying? Is this something that we might get, and I would pass it on to you, and then one of us would end up in hospital, maybe die? It did cross my mind, and I think also speaking to my colleagues, it crossed everyone's mind. But you kind of felt this strange curiosity about it as well, because you go into medicine not because of money, you go in because you're a massive geek, and you just love science, and you like working with people as well, and it's just this curiosity about this is something completely different and new, and you could be a part of something and try and fight it. And it was just this curiosity that made me want to
I think there's curiosity, and then there's this willingness to throw yourself in the fire. And it's like, and also we're talking about something very serious here. You've got colleagues, there's medical professionals all around the UK and families who have lost loved ones to this. It's a very real, very dangerous thing. And I think that the mindset that we often don't understand, or I didn't necessarily understand its full impact, was that's how you guys are wired. And it's just like the bravery to just go, nope, we're just going to go in. You
have to, because if everyone said we're not gonna run the hospital services, we would be in a very big problem. Like we would not have staff to deal with normal stuff like heart attacks or strokes, plus also coronavirus as well. So I think there were part of me that just felt a bit not obliged, like we were never forced to do anything, but this is my job. And I have amazing colleagues, and you felt this kind of solidarity to one another that you had to go in. Sadly, I do know that some colleagues of mine have actually been affected really badly by coronavirus. Some people have passed it on to family members who've been severely unwell, and some people have been struggling with the long-term effects of coronavirus. So it hasn't been an easy journey at all. And I see myself as quite lucky because I haven't been affected by coronavirus at all.
Well, I wonder, I mean, obviously you're a very well put together person. Your psychology is very strong, but also it's worth bearing in mind just how much the psychological impacts weigh up, because that is a very real thing, right?
I think the psychological impact has affected everyone. I think no one has not been affected by coronavirus. But I've been lucky in the sense that I haven't had any problems with my breathing, or I've been more asymptomatic by corona. So I've never had a positive test. I have negative antibodies, which is surprising. But I wonder if I potentially have had it because I've been exposed so much, so I can't see why I haven't had it.
Well, one of my good mates is, one of our good mates, Jimmy. You know, he's in the police. Something that I'm still racking my brain on is how can frontline workers be exposed to the level that you are? I mean, you're in there, you're taking care of these people. You know, every possible like body fluid that could come at you is coming at you. You're in these high pressure rooms that are, you know, essentially positive pressure rooms that are helping people to breathe, which means that your lungs are being opened and you're being exposed so much. I'm struggling to understand, and I know that there's no real answers, but how do you think it's possible that you can be in there living and breathing in these environments and have months and months of exposure without having caught it yourself or having negative tests often?
I think it's too early to say for sure at this present time, because we don't know for sure what the effects of coronavirus is right now. There's symptoms now coming up that we didn't know about months ago. But I think people have different immune response, and this is just coming from my point of view. So I think some people have a different immune response where they don't make antibodies and they fight infection quite quickly. And I think I just can't think of like how I can be negative. Like, I'm pretty sure I must have had coronavirus at one point, because it's impossible. But still, it's very in the early phase. We don't know how exactly the coronavirus our immune system is fighting the infection. And I think only time would answer that.
And it's a fair point, because we're still figuring this out as we go. That's why I wanted to kind of open up this conversation now. I felt like it was a reasonable time, because in my circles, when I turn to social media, one of the things that people are really curious about, especially as they start to learn about you, and when we were doing kind of Clap for Your Carers, a lot of people got introduced to you and what you were doing. But when you're there, when you're on the front lines, like, walk us through what the typical journey. And I know this might end up being a little bit morbid and a little bit scary for some people, but like, a lot of people want to know this. What are you seeing? How are you treating people? How is this manifesting in reality for you on the front line?
I think it depends on what kind of size the hospital is. So I'm working in a small hospital, district hospital, and it depends on what specialty you are working in. So if you're in surgery, you won't really come across coronavirus. Like, the way you come across it is that your lists get cancelled. Everyone needs a screen prior to it. But I've been on the medical side, so for me, I've been more involved with coronavirus. During the first wave, I don't think I saw that much. Like, it's so much different now from how it was. So in the beginning, I was on the wards. We were seeing corona patients. We had no clue how to manage them. You know the basic things, like how to treat an infection, but you don't know what can we give them to make the symptoms shorter, more milder. How can we improve mortality? Things like that. It's just we had no science behind it.
So what were you attempting when we look back at that first wave and people were presenting? They were obviously unwell. Yeah. What were the typical symptoms? So
it's been the same symptoms throughout that we know, but we added more symptoms to the lists. So coronavirus is a virus that affects multiple organs. It affects your lungs, it can affect your kidneys, it can affect your gut. So you get all these weird symptoms. For some people, they're completely asymptomatic, and that would be the majority of everyone. But then you have the selected few, and we kind of stratified it and identified some risk factors who would present with very short of breath. They need oxygen. Their oxygen levels are really low. They have a terrible dry cough, headaches, muscle aches. Sometimes we can see diarrhea with it. We can see some weird rashes now, which wasn't seen that much in the first wave. Confusion. It's a variety of symptoms. But I think in the very early days, we didn't have enough tests. We didn't have enough protective equipment. We didn't know what kind of treatment we should try, so we were kind of throwing things at it like we would with any other infection. Because we've been treating flu and we've been treating tuberculosis and other lung conditions for decades and hundreds of years. But this was completely new for us. So we tried experimental treatment, and we've been doing a massive trial nationally. And from that, we now have gained some insight into things that might work. So it's been a massive challenge emotionally for us healthcare professionals as well, because you bond with patients and you want them to do well, and seeing anyone dying, it's a massive loss. So it's been tough, but we've been trying different things, and finally we can see now what works and what doesn't really work. But still, we are not near a cure at all.
So going back to what you were saying about the kind of oxygen, which I understand is like blood saturation. I know that I'm going to sound like an idiot when I'm trying to talk about this stuff. But, when patients come in and they're struggling to breathe, and I understand that it's a problem with the ability to absorb oxygen into the blood that seems to be the main reason why.
Very technical there.
Am I? Am I impressing
physiological. So what happens So you have mild symptoms of coronavirus, and then you have the unfortunate few who who has to come to hospital, either because the body is responding to the virus in such a way that you get inflammation of the lungs. Also, you might additionally have bacterial infection as well. So what we normally do is that we treat them with strong antibiotics. We give them steroids now, which we seem to have some good results with.
And sorry to jump in, because I'm going to start playing devil's advocate with a lot of this stuff, because I'm aware of a lot of misinformation and a lot of problems with this subject, and we'll talk about that later. But you said you use antibiotics.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are arguing online because they say, look, this is a virus. It's obvious that you don't use antibiotics on a virus because it's not a bacteria. So why do you use antibiotics?
That's a very good point. Like, you shouldn't really use antibiotics for viruses. But the thing is that if you have a viral infection, you can get superimposed bacterial infections. That means your body is quite weak, and if you have fluids building up your lungs, then they can get bacteria infected in there. So we do give antibiotics just to avoid any superimposed bacterial infection. And we don't really have much choices as well. Like, we don't really know how to manage coronavirus still. But we give antibiotics until we find out that they don't have a bacterial infection by checking their bloods and everything. We give them steroids because it's dampened down the inflammation of the lungs. And during the first wave, we were experimenting with steroids, and we see some good results. So that's why we're giving it.
I found it interesting that it was only a few weeks in when you were in the first wave, and obviously every day when you came home, I was like, right, well, what have you learned? What's happening? And you said so early on, and I'll never forget, because you kind of said, I've kind of got this theory that if we could stop the immune system from like going into overdrive, and you'd said it, you called it almost right at the start, this idea of using steroids. So the idea, if I remember correctly, is it stops your body from attacking.
Sort of, yeah. You stop so you have a lot of inflammation in the lungs, and you need inflammation because that's the way the body can clear bugs. But also, inflammation can be bad if it's chronically, and it can actually irritate tissues and cause fibrosis and basically break down the lungs a little bit. So we give steroids to dampen down the inflammation in the body, and we've proven to see some good results during the first wave. We also now trying other treatment, which is experimental. So one of them is, for instance, plasma. So it's a blood product. So we take blood from people who recovered from coronavirus, and we take the antibodies. So that's the immune response that fight the infection, and we give it to patients who are very unwell and are very short of breath, requiring oxygen and meeting the right criteria. Then we try and give it to them, and it's still in the early phase, but I've seen some cases who have been improving with plasma, but it's still in the early phase.
Is that one of the reasons why we're seeing a much lower mortality rate? Because as we look at corona, the first wave, anyone who's gone on to, like Worldometer, or anyone who's seen the statistics, one thing that definitely resonates is that the death rate is so much smaller. And that is actually, I think, causing a lot of, how would you say it? Like, that's causing a lot of disagreement and kind of causing a bit of a flashpoint in terms of people who have got different, like, let's say, ideologies on how they think about this and how they think the country should be reacting. So when you talk about these plasma trials, when you talk about the use of steroids, when you talk about at least getting some treatments evolutionarily kind of decided on of what's working and what's not, is that really why we're seeing this reduce?
I think that's really hard to say. I don't think that's why we're seeing less mortality. But obviously this is just from my point of view. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I don't know the full data completely. But from what I can share in my district hospital, we saw this kind of wave going up in March, April, May. Then it kind of started plateauing a little bit and then improved by July. And then July, August was fairly okay. And then we didn't really see much corona cases in August at all. If we did, it was mainly asymptomatic. They were there for something completely different reasons, and you just sent them home, really. It wasn't it was nothing like we're seeing now with the second wave. So I don't think, like, from my understanding, I don't think that's related to the mortality and the spike we see in cases right now. I can only come with guesses, but one of them could be potentially the fact that the virus may have mutated. Maybe we now see a more of a virus that is spreading faster but doesn't really have as high mortality anymore. That could be one thing. Another
Right.
thing is this might be way too early. Maybe the mortality will go suddenly all up. It's just too early.
We've discussed it a couple of times
Yeah.
about a very commonly held idea that isn't something that anyone can really definitively prove because we just don't have enough information yet. But there is that idea that the way that a virus becomes most effective is in its ability to spread the most.
Yeah.
And in being enhanced in its like spreadability, it's like you want a virus to become less and less symptomatic, right? Because like Ebola, if it kind of kills your hosts and makes really bad symptoms, that's not conducive to it spreading widely.
So it's just down to kind of evolution, if you think about it. So if you have a very aggressive virus that is killing the host, very deadly virus, it won't have the chance to spread to that many people because they would have symptoms, they would die before they actually manage to spread it to someone else. But if you have someone that doesn't really give much symptoms, doesn't kill the host before it's been spreading to other people, that could become more of an effective pandemic. So it spreads faster. So one theory is that maybe coronavirus have mutated. The other one is that maybe we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. And the third could be a bit more morbid. Maybe the people who were vulnerable, they got it in the first wave and they got very well, and unfortunately some of them died as well. So maybe the people who were vulnerable in the society, they passed away in the first one. But I'm just speculating because I don't know the answer to this, and I think it's way too
no
early.
one really has the answer to it, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have a really pragmatic conversation with you, because obviously I'm in music. There's a lot of like extremely like liberal there's a lot of extremely like liberal people. There's a lot of people taking to the streets. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of anger, and as I'm going out to social media, I'm looking at how much we're just ready to tear each other apart. I just feel a bit like I want to share your story more, because it's like, as this graph has gone up and as Boris stands there and he does his presentation and as world leaders go, look, our graph's going up, there are people legitimately who just say, look, this is fake, you know, like this is all 5G, like this is all rubbish, they're doing this to control you, and then you come home and you're exhausted because you're dealing with the actual people desperate and clinging on to their lives. And it's a hard dichotomy for me, because it's just like, how can you rationalize, and how do you feel when you have to look on social media at people telling you that this stuff is fake and that coronavirus isn't real?
It's frustrating because I can understand that majority of people will be asymptomatic. At the moment, we have more infections in the north of England, so anyone in London would, well, now we see a spike in London as well, but if you were in London, you might not see the effects right now as much as you saw in the first wave. But
and when you say you see the effects, you're talking about the people being hospitalised, taking
or getting the infection.
Yeah.
But so it's sad. It's frustrating when you meet people. I've met a couple of people who claim that the virus is used by the government to control the population and to I don't know what they think that the government is going to do, because I think if the government chooses to use coronavirus to control the population, they're doing a very bad strategy. It's going to kill the economy. It's going to kill the economy. We don't want it.
Well, everyone's just got their own gut instinct on this, haven't they? And don't get me wrong, like I don't necessarily think we've handled this brilliantly, and just like for full transparency, because there's no other way to handle this than full transparency. It's like I am much more like on a spectrum, swung towards the herd immunity idea. I don't think we're going to get away from this. I think it's going to be years for a vaccine to come out, and I'm more swung towards getting back at it. But that's easy for me to say, isn't it? Because I'm relatively young. Although I have people at risk in my family that I want to protect, I would prefer to look at isolation plans around them and crack on. So and when these people are coming forward with their ideas that don't necessarily match other ideas, other people in my family are a lot stricter and a lot more worried about it, and they don't think, you know, and even within us,
it's hard.
We've
like,
got that.
I don't even know where I'm standing on it, because I think the government has some really difficult decisions to make, because part of me is thinking, yes, if we have a strict lockdown, we could reduce the cases and reduce the infection transmission, because it's just logical. If you don't go out your house, you won't spread it to anyone else. But at the same time, that has very negative consequences for the economy. It has negative consequences for education, like a whole lost generation of young students in universities, in schools. And also I can see it on healthcare professionals as well. Like, we have training nurses, student nurses, and training doctors, medical students, who've been missing out on their placements. So we will have a generation of new doctors who have lost maybe 1-2 years of their training, that's bad. So I can see the societal long-term effects, I think, is going to be heavy. But also we need to protect the vulnerable, because I've seen sick patients with coronavirus, and it's real. I can tell you that it's definitely real. So when I come across people who believe coronavirus is fake or created by the government or by 5G or whatever, it makes me sad. Because like, I and my colleagues, I think we can agree that it's frustrating, because you're working with sick patients, and the majority of them are in the older population group, but we've seen younger patients as well, and it's very sad.
I think sometimes there's this detached feeling that if you're not interacting with it, and if you're going around London, I mean, look, I've had to go in public transport, or I've had to crack on with things as we have needed to do. You've been jumping on the train every morning to get to work, and it's just like, I think it's easy for some people, if they don't come into contact with this thing, it just seems like this cloud. It's out there in the ether, this coronavirus that's somewhere. Exactly. But if you don't see it, it's easy to just go, this is just government's strategy. It's crazy. I mean, the one, like, I think
the reasoning behind the government strategy, I don't get my head around, because it's like, oh yeah, the government is imposing a virus that's going to kill the economy and kill the educational effects, and
but it's all about like the elite. Do you know what I mean? It's all about the elite kind of financially being benefactor of the situation, being able to control the populations, and get mandatory vaccines through. Like, how would you feel about that, for example? If someone said, if the government said we're going to put a mandatory vaccine in, which is what a lot of people are naturally concerned about. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I always think that we should never impose mandatory things on people. Vaccines are incredible. They save lives every day. They before vaccines, we saw a lot more cases of polio. We saw measles, who could make people deaf and blind and kill young kids. So vaccines are great. We need them. But I don't think we should make it mandatory. I think people should have enough education to choose vaccines, but you should never impose anything on people. What I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, we shouldn't really make it mandatory. I don't think so.
Yes, I know that I'm putting you in a weird position asking these questions, but I do find it fascinating, especially again when we look at. I mean, conspiracy theories are fascinating anyway, especially the passion that a lot of people follow, because the whole vaccine concept is just a weird one. Like, I forget a lot, but we have a growing contingency of people who legitimately are like anti-vaccines. That they campaign actively to say, look, this is a horrendous thing that we're doing to kids, that it's dangerous, that it's like risking lives. And, you know, we've spoken about it before, because I thought, you know, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I thought that polio was essentially eradicated. I thought that we'd kind of got rid of that.
Well, we almost eradicated it, but then especially after the Wakefield study, which was completely bullshit.
Well, what for people who don't know what the Wakefield study is, can you walk us
I think
through?
it was early 90s. There was a British doctor called Dr. Wakefield who did some research and essentially proved that MMR vaccines, which is for mumps, measles and rubella, given to young kids, is related to autism. And that creates a lot of trouble for doctors in general, because his science was fake. It was actually the numbers were manipulated, and he did it to financial gain from it. So the medical society in UK and across the world is rejecting his research, and it's just disgraceful what he did. But that has had long aftermath from this.
Because he got a lot of exposure and a lot of press at the time. So let me get this straight. He basically said that MMR vaccine, which was a group of vaccines, was connected to autism, and he fundamentally made up the data. It was just complete bollocks.
Well, he manipulated the data to make it look like it was related to autism, but we haven't proven it's related to autism at all. And what he wanted was to sell the vaccines individually, actually.
Right. So that's where his financial interest comes in.
Yeah. But the aftermath was that people actually now believe that these vaccines are related to autism and have nasty effects, and it's completely untrue. And it's sad to now see spikes of diseases that we almost eradicated to actually now go up in the society. And it's just mental that this is happening, because we have invented something incredible as vaccines to stop you from having nasty infections and making people deaf, blind, getting seizures, at risk of death, essentially. And then now people are refusing something like this. It's just mental. I can't believe it.
I think it will touch a particular nerve when you have situations where you have to pick up the pieces and help families, and you have to help the process of fixing the aftermath of diseases that we just shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And again, like it's a weird thing. Maybe because we're on the same page. I would love to talk to more people. I'd love to find anti-vaxxers and talk to them and understand more about
to understand more about it, because they have some concerns, and if we manage to just educate people a bit more, making people more critical of studies.
Because I could easily have read this. What was the study again? Sorry,
the Wakefield.
Yeah.
I think it was even published in the Lancet, shockingly.
But that's it. If you're looking at the Lancet and you're reading this, and if you're taking a specific time to research, you come across this Wakefield paper, I could easily see myself going, right, we can't have vaccines because the data's there that proves that there's a link to autism. And if you're going to protect your child, that's why I definitely understand why we have anti-vaxxers. I can understand the psychology of finding that path, but also it's just so dangerous, isn't it? Of what's happening now.
I just think that we should try and make people more skeptical of research, because it's good to be skeptical. That's basically science in a nutshell. You always have to think for yourself. And I think we should maybe in school teach people about research techniques, so we can look at the data and see how can people manipulate data. What's good research? What's bad research? And then they can make up their own mind. Because there's thousands of articles out there. There are thousands of people claiming to be an expert. And it's dangerous because people actually believe in what they're saying. So I believe people should be critical. I believe people should do their own research and make it up. But they need the right tools for it, because you can claim that any research is a good study, but it's not. So always be critical.
Especially with what you're doing now, because you're in the research teams with Corona at the moment.
Yeah. So recovery trial is something that we do national, and we're recruiting doctors across the UK. I'm one of the people being recruited to this trial, so I'm basically looking at patients and seeing if they are a good candidate for the drugs that we give for coronavirus.
And by that you mean plasma?
Not just plasma, we have other drugs as well. Like one is an antibiotic, one is a drug that we use for rheumatoid arthritis, and plasma is also one of them. And we don't have enough data yet to say that they are efficient or not efficient. So we're giving it to people, but we have to screen them because some of them can be a bit nasty.
What makes me wonder about the stuff that Trump had. Was it remdesivir?
I haven't had time to look exactly what he had.
Well, he's been shot up with just about everything by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I find that very puzzling because we don't give trial drugs to anyone with coronavirus. We give it to people who are unwell, so people requiring oxygen. Or got a nasty nasty coronavirus.
Where it's kind of a last ditch.
So we don't give it to anyone who comes into hospital and happen to have a coronavirus test that is positive, because most people would recover from it, and we've seen a lot of people recover from it as well. So yeah, I find that a bit strange, but as I said, I don't know what the circumstances he had or what exactly he had. But Trump is just a different subject.
We won't go into that. What are the positive things for you? Like the journey you've gone through is a heavy one. I know that you're incredibly strong and you put a smile on always, but like on your behalf, everything that you've gone through has been nothing short of a bit of a nightmare. But you kind of cracked through it and smashed through it. And I know it's been a difficult process, but like for people who are obviously going to be admiring the stuff that you do, what are the positive parts? Like, what do you see on the horizon that's developing well?
Well, I think from a research point of view, I think we now are working better across country lines. I think we're sharing more data with each other. I think it's been very interesting being so kind of young in the doctor world. Like I've only worked as a doctor for 1.5 years soon, and to get involved with this top research on the edge research is just really, really, really cool. I think for people in general, it looks like I didn't get to enjoy this because I've been working, but the looks of it looked like more people were outside. It was great sunshine. So I think that's the positive sides of coronavirus. If you can say there are any positive things. But I think people have kind of connected and realized how important it is to sort of be out in the nature, sharing information. I think that's what we can take from this. But yeah, I would say from a healthcare point of view, we all want this thing to go over. We're not enjoying it. But there are some positives from it.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously made a huge amount of progress coming into this second wave to where you were at the first. And I think that it seems to me, from the outside looking in to some respect, that care is getting better. We are understanding it more. We are now finding a better process. We're adapting in a way where this is no longer this really scary looming thing that's going to come out and grab you, because when you put the news on all the time, and look, we felt it, didn't we? Like when we sit there, we listen to the news, if you take that too much on face value and the media are just like smacking you around the head constantly with this horrific news, it's like you don't know the barometer of where to level your thoughts in how much you should necessarily be worried about. I think
you've got to be careful there as well, because this is serious, and it's still something that is scary. And we see still like quite young patients being involved with it. But as you said, I think we also have to look at the bright side, because you can't constantly walk around being scared of it. But yeah, I just want to correct you there.
No, that's fine.
It is serious.
I mean, we've had our debates so much, and there's, like even with friends we have, you could pick any subject. I mean, masks is a great one. Like we have friends who just like absolutely won't wear masks. They're just like, look, and you can understand where they're coming from. A lot of people just go, look, the government isn't around to dictate what I do. It's like, fair enough. It's like, I don't have to wear a mask. It's like, fair enough.
But I think also it's a collective effort, because the masks are mainly protecting other people. So you wear the mask to protect other people. So if you choose not to, there's a cat coming in. Hello,
we've got a cat coming in here. I love this, that people listening on this podcast are not going to understand how cute this cat is, and he's also desperately trying to get in. Like, he's found. Come on,
little boy.
But like I have
to break.
That's fine. You pick him up. You can't just leave a cat there without having a cuddle. Do you reckon cats can carry corona?
Yeah, well, they say that pets can be affected by coronavirus as well.
But like the mask thing's a good example, because I find it funny that although like I kind of understand the point and perspective of saying, well, no one should impose what I do. It's like, okay, fine, we don't have to wear a mask, but you also don't have to be served at a bar, or you don't have to be let into like Tesco's, or you don't have to be let into like Lidl's down the road on a Saturday night when you want a beer. It's just like it's all about liberty, and sometimes just understanding that it's really less about you and more about just the way that you're. Do you know what I mean? Because
we are young, so we are less at risk of having severe effects of coronavirus, but we could still be affected bad, because you might be one of those few unlucky ones, and you never know, or you might be passing it on to one of your loved ones. So I think we should always be careful and take the government's suggestions seriously, because they're made by experts. So I think masks are quite good with protecting other people, other vulnerable people. Even though you might not be scared of coronavirus, there are lots of other people who are scared, and it's helping to stop spreading it. Masks are not 100% foolproof. Like there will be, like, it won't stop you from spreading it completely, but it can reduce the spread.
Well, maybe that's one of the main flashpoints, is people go, well, look, if we can't reduce it completely, then what's the point? It's just a bit of cloth. But maybe we sometimes forget to realise that it's just a reduction, and a reduction is helpful.
Any reduction is helpful, because we've now been in lockdown for a year soon, which is pretty long, and I think most of us can feel the effects. And funny enough, from the hospital point of view, I find it a bit more, not stressful, but a bit more busier than it was during the first wave.
Do you think that's because a lot of people are just coming to hospital for their typical stuff, as well as? That probably is. And we do encourage people who are really unwell to come to hospital, because it's important. If it's life-threatening, you don't want to stay at home with a heart attack. Yeah. You want to come to hospital. But at the same time, we're seeing the standard routines. I think people are forgetting that there is still a virus going on. So the clinics have a massive waiting list now, and I think it's important for people to realize that it is because of coronavirus, and they have to be patient as well, because it's still there. It hasn't gone, and the wards are getting more busier, and we just have to work all together in this, because it's just difficult, and this is new. This is a completely different thing that we ever experienced. Yeah, and again, hats off to you and all of the healthcare workers and everyone who's quite literally risking their lives,
their families, and
every day,
loved ones as well,
and their families. And I think, as we think about like wrapping up this episode, because I think we'll probably end up like touching base again, like after this winter, and like see where we're at. But again, this is a strange question to ask, but like, how do you think we're going to handle this winter? What's your projections for?
It's mental. Yeah, you just don't know. Because obviously we get the normal flu cases, and everyone gets lung conditions. Everyone with lung conditions, they come into hospital again because they get infections. And normally there's a lot of winter pressures, and now you have coronavirus on top of it. So we just don't know. It's going to be a strange one. But I think by the end of the winter, we will have a more clear plan for what will happen for the next year, because then we've gone through all the seasons with a normal infection that goes on, and then we could kind of see the trajectory of the next wave, or where we are. And
what would be your closing words on people who tell you that coronavirus is
it is
fake?
Real. It is definitely real. I can feel it on my body, and I've seen it. It's be cautious, be careful. Don't believe that it doesn't exist, because you don't know if you or one of your family members will get it if you're incautious.
Exactly. Well, look, thanks. I know that you were a bit nervous about this at the start, but like, thanks for sharing your story. It's a story that I've been wanting to just like get out there for a little while. I've wanted to introduce you to people who have been following, and they've been very keen on what you're doing, and I'm sure that when we put this out, you're going to get a ton of love and support. So, Dr. Karine Johannessen, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
No worries.